Ramesh Krishnamurthy, who is a CEO of Inquisity, and I happened to meet him in our Chennai office sometime back. He has tons of ideas, and believe me, and it's and also really talking about some of the painful areas in the supply chain. And we are having a equally interesting host, Varun Kakkar. He's part of our elite community, and he's with Grazim, and he has really grown the supply chain. So we are going to have a very interesting session the next 30 minutes, and participants can post the questions on the chat box depending on the time availability. Varun will pick up and put it across to Ramesh. Over to Varun and to take it to start with Ramesh as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, Venkatesh. We have with us Mr. Ramesh Krishnamurthy. He's the CEO of Inquisity, more than 25 years of experience in the industry, and it's my honor to be able to interview. Thanks a lot, Ramesh, for joining us. The topic for our fireside chat is MTO is not MTS. So made to order is not MTS. We'll quickly jump into the water and start swimming quickly. So Ramesh, my first question to you is, what is the fundamental difference between MTO and MTS, and how does it impact inventory and production planning, Ramesh?
So first of all, thank you, Venkatesh, for giving this opportunity to actually talk to this elite forum. So I was hearing the previous conversation, extremely engaging, lots to learn and lots of insights. And so clearly there is something good going on here. So this is my first interaction. So pardon me if there are any faux pas from my side. So I'll quickly now get into the conversation. So Inquisity basically we work on planning solutions. So broadly we work on supply chain and SOP and stuff like that. So a lot of our conversations with respect to many supply chain heads and always revolve around this entire question of MTS and MTO. And MTS and MTO is something that defines the planning strategy. And it is, if you were to look at ERPs also, it is fundamental in terms of the planning strategy. But broadly, what MTO and MTS stand for are the dependency on the demand of the other elements of the supply chain. So if it is an independent demand, so I'm just making it simple so that we basically say that anything which is an independent demand, where the coupling between the supply chain, that is production planning, and the is not deeply and highly coupled with the demand per se, I would put it into the arena of MTS. This is purely from the supply chain, and wherever there is a higher degree of coupling between the production and production planning, which includes material planning and capacity planning, where there's a higher degree of coupling between the two, I would consider that to be MTO. So what I mean by this is that typically the demand is not completely aligned and dependent or drives the production. It indirectly drives the production. Whereas in the case of MTO, it basically the orders actually drive the production. So to that extent, MTS fundamentally has a greater degree of dependence on the inventory rather than the capacity. So that fundamental difference is there. And the other point is that typically we're talking about MTS, which would be in B2C kind of environments, whereas wherever we have MTO, we typically have B2B environments. So industrial products, and where when a company like say Hindalco is giving metals to another, let's say Prestige, TTK or something, then typically it's a B2B kind of an environment where an MTO becomes more obvious. Whereas an FMCG or a paints business like yours will fundamentally have, on the distribution side, it will be basically more of an MTS. However, in your case, of course, there are industrial paints also. So in which case, it will have an MTO characteristic. So that's essentially the difference where we, from a supply chain perspective.
So thanks a lot for answering that question and very easy words. I think that makes it quite clear for us. I'll get down to my next question, Ramesh. What does the demand forecasting and data analytics, what role does it play in optimizing production scheduling and resource allocation?
So I think this is a little bit of a contentious topic. I think there is a lot of thoughts that demand planning. I think one of the previous speakers said that, frankly, we have no idea what the next 6 months looks like. So if they don't know if industry practitioners don't know what the next 6 months looks like, then demand planning typically would actually be has only limited importance. I think the broad point that as supply chain practitioners, we believe is that demand planning really does help in getting a broad sense of the numbers. But this entire obsession towards accuracy of demand, which is what the other problem is, that, you really want to have very accurate demand. That is, I think, I mean, you really can't get that. You basically are chasing something which is not possible. So a variability in demand is an obvious. So demand planning basically then helps us. So where does that demand planning help us? Then demand planning basically helps us in getting a sense of what the outcome is going to be. So in an MTS, a made to stock kind of environment, we are fundamentally looking at demand forecasting and data analytics from the perspective of getting a view on what should be the demand that we should plan for, and basis the demand and the variability, both lead time variability as well as demand variability, to figure out what kind of norms should we be actually keeping. So norms is basically the amount of inventory that we want to hold over and above the demand. So typically that's in an MTS situation, demand forecasting helps us in that way. Now, in an MTO environment, the demand forecasting actually is, if you ask any MTO, it's a what demand forecasting. We fundamentally are getting orders and we have long-term contracts. And the only thing that we get is the dispatch schedule that they are expecting. So what is this demand forecasting? So there, demand forecasting has its purpose, and I'll possibly come back to it at a later time. But where the demand analysis or the data analytics actually help us is to get an understanding of the nature of the demand. And this works both in MTS and MTO. When I mean nature of the demand, very normally, most companies would do an RRR analysis, which is a runner, repeater, stranger analysis. And runner, repeater, stranger analysis fundamentally helps us in deciding which items are actually more predictable, which items are actually not as predictable, and which are absolute or more seasonal, and which of the items are actually very difficult to predict. So then it basically buckets these different items. And we have a slight variant of that. We call it the 9-box analysis, where we have on one side of it, we have predictability, which has 3 axes, high, low, medium. And then we have on the other side, the impact. The impact could be anything. Impact could be revenues, it could be sales volume, it could be contribution, and so on. And again, you have the high, medium, low kind of scale. So this 9-box, we basically put all the different items in that 9-box to get an assessment. That particular analytics helps us in figuring out what is the more predictable and higher impactful items that we should, and what should be the planning strategy for that. Again, what should be the planning strategy for for high predictability but low volume? Then what do we do there? Okay, and possibly less frequent as well. And then you have this tail, which typically is very long, where we want to know what is it that what is the length extent of your tail, and what should be the strategies for that. So that basically comes into the stranger items part of it. So the analysis actually helps us plan our operations in a better way. Let's say long-term planning for procurement. Typically in pharmaceuticals, you'll have chemicals which will come from China. So there's 3 months of lead times. For other places, we're working with a kitchen equipment manufacturing company, which has got input material which comes in 3 months time. So then basically, how do you actually end up doing the long-term procurement planning? Similarly, demand planning has another very interesting useful use case, which is that especially when it comes to seasonal products. So seasonal products, by definition, or the way we define it, is where the peak capacity is and the peak demand are matched in such a way that the peak demand much exceeds the peak capacity. In that case, it is quite possible that if I start manufacturing for that particular for that particular month, you will see that you will not actually be able to meet the demand. So then the only thing that we can do is start doing what we call as pre-builds. So then the question is, when do you start pre-building? So then the demand planning or demand forecasting helps us get a view that is in this particular month, which is, let's say, in case of paints business, let's say 1 month prior to Diwali, okay, or 2 months prior to Diwali. we basically know that there is going to be significant demand. Okay, and wherever it's a higher, wherever there is a higher demand, we just have to check whether the capacity is good enough or not. And if it's a product which is not really very time sensitive, in the sense it's got a good shelf life, then you can start pre-building that particular inventory, and demand forecasting again helps you in doing that. So to sum up, basically demand forecasting is an indicator. I wouldn't call it a definitive number to focus upon, but it definitely gives us a good sense of what should be the norms for inventory that you should keep, what should be the directional flow, what is the directional flow of each and every product and customer, what is the kind of places where we have to pre-build an inventory, and how to actually plan your planning strategy with respect to build versus wait versus just build for a longer duration of time and so on.
So thanks a lot, Ramesh. I think that gives a lot of clarity in terms of obviously the nature of MTO or MTS and how the demand planning analytics impact MTO and MTS. Basis that, my next question, Ramesh, will be how does combining MTO and MTS offer advantage to the companies? Is there a way to combine them? Are there advantages of combining, and how should we proceed there for companies which offer both kind of products? I think especially for them, this would be important.
Yes, I think the MTO and MTS is more of nature of the beast here. I think we cannot actually control MTO and MTS. We can control our strategy. We may say that like in your case, I can be in decorative paints. It will fundamentally be an MTS. But if I were to then go into industrial paints, then I don't have any choice but to get into the MTO territory. So then the MTS and MTO are basically nature of the beast for you. The beast that you want to engage with, that defines it. Again, in the case of pharmaceuticals, prior to this, everybody was pharmaceuticals. So if it is basically domestic demand, then typically domestic demand will follow the MTS kind of an approach. But if you have a significant component of exports, then automatically you have to go into the MTO kind of an environment. And again, there the point of basically saying that this is better or that is better is really not a relevant question. The question is really, if I have a mix of MTO and MTS in my portfolio, then how do I actually manage my supply chain? And how do I manage my material planning? And how do I manage my capacity planning? And so that is a more possibly a better question to answer than to actually say that, is this a good strategy to do MTO or good strategy to do MTS? So I think you will not be able to actually get that, because you may the customer themselves, the OEMs, let's say for a tire manufacturing company, the OEMs are going to give you order. They are not going to actually tell you that this is the forecast. You just keep an eye up and I'll lift it. And if that is what they're saying, they're fundamentally saying that they have a firm order. So then, broadly speaking, you just have to work with what is available as part of your customer profile, basically.
So, Ramesh, in the past, what we have seen is that, as you have said, so for some of the products in a company, an MTO is a strategy that you will follow, and some of the products you will follow MTS. Even in paints, for example, we have a very big builder segment where we need to service. What we have seen is that if both are being serviced through the same supply chain, then it leads to havoc of like your MTS inventory getting used and impact. So how should the companies focus on catering to that kind of demand where your supply chain the MTS can be impacted by big orders into the MTO supply chain? I think this is something that will be important.
So this is actually the classic problem where this problem doesn't exist when we are talking about FMCGs. FMCG is fundamentally an MTS kind of an environment. So typically it is I wouldn't say it's a simple way or not, but at least this particular problem of MTS doesn't exist there. But typically, and paints is especially a very interesting place where you actually have both MTO and MTS in significant proportions. Many places you will see that the proportion may not be that, we may be skewed towards one particular type of customers or type of products. But in case of paints, it's very clear that some companies are just engaging with one which has got about 40% institutional buying and 60% which is decorative. Then automatically you have a significant bias. Towards both. There is no actual bias by saying, okay, we'll be MTS. Now, there are multiple strategies here. Okay, I think, and it is not really possible for us to cover everything, but I'll just give you some indicative strategies which are there. The fact of the matter is that, and I'll possibly be getting it a little expanding this question point, that even if for MTS, MTO, so wherever we have done this, wherever I've reached a customer and the customer says, so we are in the chemicals business, so basically our customers are MTO, or we are in the metals business, our customer is MTO, or we are we basically say, okay, fine, why don't, or we are in the textile business or yarn business, and our customer is again MTO and so on. I always will ask them to give them their sales data, historical sales data. And whenever we have done this analysis of historical sales data, we have always shown to them that actually speaking, while they are MTO, a large proportion of their demand or orders are actually highly predictable, extremely predictable. In fact, in case of the metals company that we work with, it is about 80% of their demand is actually highly predictable. Similarly, for a chemicals company that we are currently working with, again, about 70% of the demand is predictable. Similarly, for a yarn company, again, they came back and said, listen, it's a big problem with production planning. I have orders which are going for a particular time, and which is related to OTIF, and the other which is related to inventory. So it's a big problem. So again, we showed to them that, listen, there is the fact of the matter is that you have a significant amount of material which is predictable. Now, as soon as it becomes predictable, then you can basically start considering some ideas with respect to MTS within the MTO environment. Okay, so we basically then are trying to see what inventory levels we can keep at every point. Now, inventory itself is a bit of a more complex point that when we think of inventory, we either think of inventory at the finished goods level. That's the first thing that comes to our mind. But frankly speaking, when we look at supply chain, that's not the way to look at inventory. There are inventories at not just, and some of them will also look at inventory at the raw material level. But there is a possibility of looking at inventory at the intermediate stages, what we call as a decoupled point. So a decoupled point is a point which comes in between the supply chain, where we can basically keep some stock, and from there we can it gives us more degrees of freedom, and it increases our OTIF possibility. So let's say that in the case of pharmaceuticals, especially say formulations, we can keep the material at hulk level. Okay, instead of keeping the material at the finished goods level packed and ready to dispatch to the various countries, we can do forecasting not at the finished goods level, but actually start doing forecasting at the hulk level. And once we do forecasting at the hulk level, we can then decide what should be the inventory that we keep there. And from there, we can then start dispatching basis the orders which are coming. Because the next step, that is the formulation, is already ready. Now we just have to do the right testing and some bit of value addition and the packaging specific to that country. We are much faster with respect to OTIFs. Okay, so then that's another strategy that we can do. The third strategy is basically actually having the prioritization very clearly there. So the prioritization could be that, my MTO orders are typically coming from OEMs and all, which is actually filling my capacity, and I have some contracts which will actually have a problem that they will actually penalize me if I'm delayed. Then I will possibly give them a higher degree of a higher priority over orders which are basically MTS. Now, when this happens, then automatically my MTS inventory strategy has to be different, because now my planning cycle is such that I'm going to keep some capacity which is fixed for firm orders, which is your MTO orders. Whereas, and in that period of time, I'm not likely to get a lot of MTS manufacturing. In that case, I need to keep that much greater amount of MTS cover as compared to what I would do if I don't do this. Okay. Now, if I don't do this, yes, that can be chaos, because one of the big problems that you talked about is the fact that I've manufactured something, I've earmarked it for something else, but it is actually dispatched for something else. Okay, so that's again a normal problem which keeps on happening. And we find that this particular point again will be a better address if we were to consider a prioritization strategy. Then we can look at it from that perspective. So the MTO basically will have significant issues because of the fact that time element of MTS comes into picture, and that actually will create issues when we are trying to mix the two on shared resources, like shared machines and stuff like that. It will always create that kind of a problem. Yeah? So to sum up, the four things you can do. One is that you can first of all consider relook at your MTO products and see whether there is a greater degree of predictability. That means we consider them as MTS, so start stocking them. So then we don't typically do it the same MTO way, start from the beginning, but we actually are selling it from inventory. Second, even if there is no predictability at the FG level, see if there is predictability at the hulk level, at the semi-finished goods level. Okay, in that case, we manufacture up to a semi-finished goods and then take only the last part of manufacturing in that part. In that case, there could be situation that you may have to invest in some storage facilities and so on and so forth. That's the second. Third is to do a good prioritization strategy. We decide what should be done. If you're giving higher priority to MTO, then you give higher priority to MTO, and then MTS is manufactured. But then MTS inventory has to be relooked at. We may have to give higher degree of coverage for that. So that's broadly, these are some things which come to mind.
So thanks a lot, Ramesh, for this. So my next question is, you have, I think, a couple of points you have raised on how to separate or how to decide between MTO and MTS. So maybe we'll like to get into more detail. Sort of, what is the most important factor to consider before choosing between MTO and MTS for a product? You mentioned the demand. You mentioned the kind of predictability in FG or at all. So what are the other factors which should be taken into account when selecting MTO versus MTS at a product level for a company?
No, like I said, I don't think a company effectively has the degrees of freedom to select MTO or MTS. It is something which is imposed on the company because that's how the customer behaves. So I don't think that is again not, I think, a relevant way of looking at it. I think the way to look at it is that knowing that it is MTS and MTO, how do we best actually deal with it? Which I answered in the previous question. Basically, I think that is a more better way of looking at it. And in all cases, like I said, we look at it from two angles. Predictability, but here predictability has got its sub parts to it. Demand predictability, lead time predictability, then the amount of the cost factors that is there to decide how much of pre-built can I do, how much inventory can I hold. Okay, the product strategy itself, which is actually beyond the realm of supply chain. Whether you need to have so many products in the first place, whether you want that particular product diversity or not. For example, we are working with a jewelry company, and the jewelry company has 25,000 different items. Now, the 25,000 different items is then they came with, how do I do an inventory strategy for this? I said, you cannot, because you are selling one item and two items in every 4 months and all. So no planning tool or forecasting tool will actually give you a very good outcome. So then the first thing that we did was actually to do a rationalization. Now, if I want to do a Zara kind of a strategy, which is basically having a huge amount of products, then the bigger way of actually planning, the planning is not in the production side of things. The planning is more on how do I do a better pricing strategy so that I can actually look at inventory to be sold at a particular price. In that case, it becomes a commodity where inventory is at a price. So that is how we will look at it. So yeah, I don't know if I answered that question correctly.
Yes, Ramesh, you have answered that. Only one point I just wanted to add. Does the lead time of making that product and getting that ready also have an
significant
as a impact on like which of the based on the customer requirement, which of the products we should have an MT or MTS? And I'll just quickly add one more question also, which I got, I think, which is quite linked to this, that are there any proven supply chain strategy to reduce the delivery time or improve the service level for MTO products? So if I can't pre-build them, can I in an agile manner respond to the demand better for those specific products?
So I think I kind of answered this question in the previous one. See, broadly speaking, there are only two things that we supply chain guys can work on, or at least from a planning standpoint. It's either inventory buffers, okay, that is material buffer, or capacity buffers. If I have these two, if I don't have these two, then if I'm very close to capacity utilization, then my degrees of freedom is very, very low. So any variability which happens in the system, I'm not able to respond. But if I have sufficient capacity and sufficient material, then I have a better chance of actually responding to the market quickly. Now, where should the inventory be it depends upon a lot of things. A lot of things basically is and for me, the better place to keep inventory is at the source, at a higher node rather than the lower node. because the greater you, the more you move away from the mother node and towards the edge nodes, the variability keeps on increasing and your degrees of freedom actually reduces because you've already incurred cost of either manufacturing or cost of distribution, and you're already committed to that particular node. So you can try to keep the inventory at a higher level. This goes whether it is for finished goods planning or it goes for semi-finished goods and manufacturing strategies. So I always look for place when we do analysis. We always look for places within the manufacturing where I can actually say that okay, I'll keep a point here where I'll keep some inventory, and this helps me to break the entire supply chain into smaller sections where the lead time variability also starts reducing. If I have a complete chain which is possibly 15 days, okay, and the variability is 10%, then 15 days into 10% is 1.5 days. Whereas if I have sections which are actually one predictable, not predictable, I break the sections down into smaller groups, and there I have variabilities where the variability of one of them is only 3 days. The 3 day is 10%. Automatically, my variability comes down to 0.3 days. So those are the ways to actually look at the supply chain, breaking it down into multiple decoupling points, and then starting to plan each and every different parts of it, both from a material and capacity standpoint. And this is very close to the theory of constraints kind of. I think there's one question which I can see here, which is typically the theory of constraints question, which is there. And broadly what I'm talking about, which is decoupling and coupling, is fundamentally across a particular bottleneck resource. So bottleneck resource fundamentally then becomes a decoupling point. And it could be a resource or it could be a process, which is a decoupling point, or it could just be a natural one. The bottleneck automatically becomes a decoupling point. But here we also create certain decoupling points depending upon the nature of the production. So while the hull may not be a bottleneck, but I'll keep a decoupling point out there because it helps me in being responding to diversity post that. So yeah, so theory of constraint definitely works on the pool basis. This also works on a pool basis on this kind of an idea.
So thanks a lot, Ramesh. I think that this really helps in providing more insight into this topic. I think one more question I want to ask. I think you have already raised some example here. So can you share a case where the company believes there are MTO company, but really they are a part of the business MTs? I think you raised the metals example there already. So maybe a couple of more example here.
I'd like to actually generalize this point and say that most of the people who have done ERP implementations think of their business as MTO or MTS, because that's how the ERP gets implemented. That, oh, this is an MTO business. So because ERP is fundamentally more of a production order and all those kind of stuff and reservation against material and everything. So they think when they will automatically say that I am an MTO. But I would recommend that each and every company which thinks that it is purely MTO go back to there, because I can't believe any company can work without some anchor customers and anchor products. And anchor customers and anchor products typically ensure that the capacity is utilized, and they then become your fundamental MTS part of the business. And the balance of it, we have to figure out how to do the MTO, whether we do it as an MTS strategy or we do it as an MTO strategy. That becomes, and there, if it is the strangers that we're looking at, we then look at whether how to reduce the variability or how to create buffers to ensure this. So I would actually say that case study, we have multiple. Metals company I talked about, chemicals company right now we're working on, we talked about. We are in talks with the yarn company. We already done this analysis and shown it to them. They are highly interested to see how does that impact their planning, because they were planning in a very different way. We will do planning in a very different way, because now that we know that there is significant MTS, we will actually work on a very different strategy out there. I would actually say that this is pretty much there for any business. Most of the businesses have this. So I wouldn't, I mean, there are many case studies. I can keep giving this. So I would actually say that for this supply chain people itself, they can do a very quick analysis. It's not very difficult. I can provide you with the tool also. It's very do this analysis. You'll yourself realize how much of it is MTS and how much is MTO.
So thanks a lot, Ramesh. It was great talking to you. We have unfortunately run out of time. I think A lot of thoughts are coming to our mind. I think I'm sure will be coming to other people's mind. So we'll park them for later and we'll continue. So thanks a lot. It was a privilege speaking with you one-on-one, and it was great to hear your insight. I hope that gives a lot of clarity, especially to me. It has given a lot of clarity in terms of the topic of MTO is not MTS. And thanks a lot, Ramesh, for joining us today.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it and I appreciate this opportunity. And hope I'm happy to answer any questions, either here or given the time. I think I might have to answer the questions on email or something. So I think Venkatesh can do the needful then. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ramesh. And I know that
Thanks
30 minutes is too short a time.
Yes.
And probably we may have to plan a long session with you. And I'm sure that will immensely benefit all the supply chain professionals equally. And thank you, Varun, for taking the time off and equally and putting it across.
So Venkatesh, one small request is that if any of the people have do this analysis and they have a different viewpoint, I'm very happy to hear the alternate viewpoint. Because this is where I've become more and more convinced that there is a significant MTS within MTO. So, yeah. But I mean, if there are if alternate realities or alternate facts coming through, then I'll love to actually hear from them.
That's
thanks.
Right.
Thanks, Varun, as well.
Professional, especially in this event, and if they're anything, then I will be definitely connecting with you for a separate meeting and to really discuss in detail about it. And it's really amazing. Thank you, Ramesh, and for making it, and Varun,